The first time I saw the barn, it looked like something out of a forgotten postcard tilted, weather-beaten, half swallowed by weeds. But I didn't see a wreck. I saw potential. I'm Nolan Everly, 38, divorced, decent with a hammer, and tired of city noise. The barn sat on 5 acres just outside a small town in North Carolina. It had been foreclosed on over a decade ago. No one wanted it. I bought it from the county auction for a fraction of what you'd pay for a used car. Took me 8 months to fix it up. I turned the old hayloft into a spacious bedroom, polished the hardwood floors hidden under years of grime, and even built a deck overlooking a stream that ran through the back of the property. My dog, Jasper, finally had room to run, and I could finally breathe. No neighbors, no noise, no nonsense. That is, until the white Escalade rolled down my gravel driveway. Out stepped a woman in her mid-50s, dripping with perfume and entitlement. Blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, clipboard clutched like it held the secrets of the universe. She didn't introduce herself. Just marched straight up to me while I was painting the front porch railing. "You must be the new occupant," she said, eyes narrowing like I'd committed a crime by existing. "I'm Cheryl. I'm the president of the Heather Ridge Homeowners Association." I blinked. Heather Ridge. "That's across the creek, isn't it?" she sniffed. "Technically, this property is part of the original Heather Ridge expansion plan from 2009. You owe 10 years of unpaid HOA dues. With penalties, that brings your total to $12,740. I dropped my brush. "Come again," she thrust the clipboard at me. "It's all here. The previous owner stopped paying in 2013. Since you now own the property, you've inherited the debt." I laughed. Couldn't help it. "Lady, this was a foreclosed agricultural structure. I bought it at a county auction." "There's no mention of an HOA anywhere in my paperwork." Cheryl pursed her lips like I just told her mayonnaise was spicy. "Whether or not it was disclosed, the HOA covenants are tied to the land. You're legally bound." I crossed my arms. "Show me the original agreement." "The one that proves this barn was ever part of your little subdivision." She hesitated, just for a second, then said, "I'll have our legal department send it. And if you don't start paying immediately, we'll begin the lien process." And just like that, she turned on her heel and marched back to her Escalade like she'd won something. I stood there, stunned. Jasper growled at the retreating SUV like he knew something was off. I wasn't about to let some clipboard queen shake me down for 12 grand over a barn she'd never even seen before. I had receipts. I had time. And I had nothing to lose. But Cheryl had just picked a fight with the wrong guy. I didn't waste any time. The next morning, I drove straight into town and parked outside the county registrar's office. A squat brick building with faded window blinds and the faint smell of ancient paper. Inside, I was greeted by a woman named Patris, who had the kind of no-nonsense energy that made you stand up straighter just talking to her. "I need to look at the parcel history and zoning classifications for parcel number 814-09-223, I said, handing her the printout from the tax records. She studied it, then motioned me toward the back. "Follow me, that one's got a thick file." That was putting it lightly. Patris set a cardboard box on the table with a grunt, dust puffing off the lid. Inside were decades of paperwork, survey plats, zoning evaluations, deed transfers, and a few handwritten notes from the 70s, one on a napkin with a coffee stain. But what mattered most was near the bottom. A 2009 zoning petition from the Heather Ridge developers requesting expansion into the adjacent lots across the creek. It was denied. Not just denied, stamped, signed, and annotated with a full-page explanation citing environmental protections on the stream, which was classified as a riparian buffer zone. The expansion was never legally approved. "You have a scanner?" I asked. "Copy machine down the hall," she said, already handing me a key card. "Take your time." I made a full copy of everything. It took over an hour. By the time I left, I had a folder thick enough to smack a bear unconscious. On my way out, I asked Patris if anyone had come digging through this file recently. She raised an eyebrow. Other than you. Just one lady maybe 2 weeks ago, blonde, reeked of gardenia, said she was with a homeowners committee. She left in a huff when I told her the parcel wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. That settled it. Cheryl knew. She wasn't confused. She was fishing testing if I'd fold without checking my cards. Back home, I installed a motion-activated camera on the front porch. I had a feeling things weren't going to stay quiet. I was right. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived, legal notice from Heather Ridge HOA's Enforcement Division. Inside was a formal demand for payment, citations for architectural noncompliance, and a warning that a lien would be filed within 10 business days if I didn't respond. They even included a blurry map with a red circle drawn around my property, only the boundaries were wrong. It sliced across the creek like it wasn't even there. I drove to the county courthouse and met with a clerk in the Mapping and Land Survey Department. She pulled the official plat map on her screen and shook her head. Your lot's outside their jurisdiction. The creek's a defined natural barrier that's been the county line for decades. There's no record of annexation or HOA overlay. I asked for a notarized copy and walked out with it tucked under my arm. That night, I started digging deeper into Cheryl's HOA. I found their public filings, their annual budgets, and something that made me sit up straight. They were over $40,000 in debt. Turns out, Cheryl had spearheaded a series of improvement projects over the last 5 years, landscaping contracts, a failed tennis court renovation, and a lawsuit over a gate installation that had never received county approval. And then there was the kicker, a line item labeled Delinquent Asset Recovery Project Barnstorm. I stared at it, the term echoing in my head. They'd named their attempt to seize my property. They were counting on it to plug their budget hole. The next morning, I filed a complaint with the sheriff's department. Deputy Callahan took my report and frowned as he scanned the documents. "This looks like attempted fraud," he said, tapping the forged map. "Especially if they're claiming jurisdiction they never had." He made copies and promised to hand it off to the investigators. That same afternoon, I got a visit from a man in a polo shirt embroidered with Heather Ridge compliance. He didn't knock, just walked straight up to the porch and started snapping pictures of the siding with his phone. I stepped out and stood between him and the barn door. "You're trespassing," I said calmly. He gave me a look like he couldn't believe I had the nerve to talk. "This is a compliance inspection. You've been cited for non-standard exterior materials and unapproved structural additions." I pointed toward the creek. "That's the HOA's jurisdiction. This side is mine. You step 1 more inch and I'll have you arrested." He scowled but backed off. As he retreated to his golf cart, I snapped a photo of him and his license plate. That evening, I started building a case folder on my computer. Every document, every photo, every interaction went into a timeline. I even took drone footage of the creek as a natural barrier, complete with audio overlay quoting county zoning laws. 3 days passed without incident. Then, Cheryl returned. This time, she brought back up a man in a blazer and loafers who introduced himself as their legal consultant. He carried a leather briefcase and the kind of voice that tried to sound reasonable while threatening you. "We don't want this to escalate," he said, sitting down uninvited on my porch bench. "But you've left us with no choice. We will be filing a lien by the end of the week." I handed him a folder. Inside were the notarized map, zoning denial, Patris's report, and a signed statement from Deputy Callahan confirming an active investigation into fraudulent claims. He didn't say a word for a moment. Then he stood up and muttered, "We'll review this with the board." Cheryl didn't move. "You think a few papers are going to stop us?" I leaned against the railing. "No, but the DA might." I watched her jaw tighten. She turned without another word, climbed into her SUV, and peeled off my driveway like a teenager denied prom. The next morning, I received a call from Detective Laramie of the Fraud Division. He had a few questions about the HOA's attempts to annex my property and whether they'd made any direct threats. They named their recovery plan Project Barnstorm, I said. That feel normal to you? He paused. No, it really doesn't. As our conversation wrapped up, he said something that stuck with me. You're not the first. Just the first to push back hard enough to make us notice. I looked out at the barn, sun glinting off the copper roof I'd installed myself, and knew they were in for a lot more noticing. 2 days after the legal consultant left my porch empty-handed, I found a manila envelope jammed into my mailbox. No postage, no return address. Inside, a stack of glossy paper stapled in one corner with a typed heading that read Heather Ridge Board Meeting Minutes Internal Draft April. The last page had a handwritten note in red ink. Thought you'd want to see this. Be careful. I didn't recognize the handwriting. No signature. But what followed was a detailed transcript of a closed HOA meeting that hadn't been publicly posted. According to the notes, Cheryl had proposed aggressive asset recovery using undocumented border interpretations to justify annexing high-value adjacent properties. Mine was specifically named. They'd held a vote on whether to pursue the lien even without legal standing. The motion passed by a narrow margin. There was more. A line item under financial discussion listed anticipated lien collections, including my property's supposed debt, already penciled in as incoming revenue for the next quarter. The HOA was planning to leverage imaginary debt into real operating capital. I took the papers straight to Detective Laramie the next morning. He took one look at the meeting transcript and asked where I got it. I told him it had been left anonymously. He scanned the pages, then leaned back in his chair. This changes things, he said. We're no longer talking about misrepresentation. If they projected income from false liens on their budget, that's financial fraud, possibly racketeering, depending on how many properties they've targeted. I asked what that meant in practical terms. It means we're going to need subpoenas, he said. That afternoon, I called a land use attorney named Merritt Keene. He'd worked previously for the county planning board and had a reputation for punching holes through bad zoning claims like wet tissue. He met me on my deck the next morning, sipping coffee while Jasper dozed in the shade. Your parcel was never annexed, Merritt said, flipping through the folder I'd compiled. They're counting on intimidation and confusion to force compliance. But if they recorded any of this as revenue or used it in financial disclosures, they're in deep. He paused to study the drone photos overlaid with parcel boundaries. You also have something else in your favor, this creek. It's a protected watershed corridor. Any development proposal that crosses it would require environmental impact studies and state-level approval. There's no way they didn't know that. He stood and pointed toward the slope near the edge of my land. They were banking on you not knowing the law. Now we flipped the table. You up for that? I nodded. I didn't come out here to get pushed around. He smiled, the kind of smile that meant he enjoyed sinking his teeth into problems like this. 3 days later, a plainclothes county investigator arrived to take photos of the property line and retrieve soil samples near the creek. Not long after, a police cruiser rolled up during lunch. Officer Ramirez stepped out and handed me a copy of a temporary restraining order not against me, but against the HOA's enforcement contractors. They were legally barred from entering my property or making further contact pending a formal investigation. That same evening, I heard the unmistakable buzz of a drone overhead. I looked up. It wasn't mine. The device hovered briefly, then zipped west toward Heather Ridge. I watched it disappear over the trees. The next morning, I got a call from Merritt. They've been trying to get aerial footage of your improvements, probably to claim you've violated some architectural guideline. He paused. They're getting desperate. Later that week, I attended a town council meeting. It wasn't something I usually did, but Merritt said it would help to put a public face on what was happening. During the open forum, I took 5 minutes to outline the situation. I didn't name anyone directly. Just laid out the facts. A foreclosed agricultural structure, legally purchased, now being targeted by a homeowners association with no jurisdiction and a history of financial overreach. The reaction was more intense than I expected. After the meeting, 2 other residents approached me in the parking lot. One was an older man named Clyde who lived on the far side of the development. The other, a retired school teacher named Lena, said she'd been fined repeatedly for landscaping violations that didn't exist. Clyde pulled a folded paper from his jacket. They tried to charge me for a fence I never built. When I asked for proof, they said it was under review. That was 2 years ago. Lena nodded. They fined me for planting native flowers. Said they weren't aesthetically appropriate. I found out later Cheryl owns the landscaping company that gets paid to rip them out. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just fighting for my barn. I was fighting for every neighbor they'd steamrolled. Merritt gathered statements from over a dozen residents. Some had been strong-armed into expensive compliance corrections. Others had received threatening letters with no legal grounding. One couple said the HOA had threatened to block the sale of their home unless they paid a 5-figure release fee, a fee not listed in any governing document. Meanwhile, Detective Laramie's investigation was picking up steam. I received a call from him late one night. They seized the HOA's financial records, he said. And you're not going to believe this. They opened a line of credit using projected fines from your property as collateral. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. He continued. Cheryl also transferred funds between the HOA and a private account under her husband's name. That's embezzlement. 2 days later, the sheriff's office issued a public statement confirming a criminal investigation into Heather Ridge HOA for financial misconduct, fraudulent lien threats, and unauthorized surveillance activities. Local news picked it up within hours, and Cheryl. She didn't show up on my property again. Instead, I got a letter from her attorney claiming everything was a misunderstanding. They offered to rescind the lien threat if I signed a non-disclosure agreement and agreed not to pursue further legal action. I handed the letter to Merritt. He laughed once, then tossed it back on the table. They're circling the drain. We didn't respond. Over the next few weeks, the situation unraveled fast. The HOA board dissolved under pressure. Cheryl was arrested on charges of wire fraud, misuse of HOA funds, and falsifying financial documents. Her legal consultant turned out to have an expired license and a history of disciplinary action in 2 other states. He vanished before he could be served. The county appointed a temporary receiver to manage what was left of the HOA's responsibilities. The new interim board released a statement acknowledging past abuses and promising full transparency. They also confirmed in writing that my property was never and could never be part of Heather Ridge. I had that letter framed. I still live in the barn. Jasper's older now, a little slower, but he still barks at anything that doesn't belong. The deck by the creek is my favorite place to sit in the evenings, watching the sun dip behind the trees. Sometimes I get visitors' neighbors who want help reading their HOA paperwork or just want to thank me for standing up. I always tell them the same thing. All I did was ask questions and refuse to sign anything out of fear. Turns out, that's more than enough when the truth's on your side and the clipboard tyrants have finally run out of tricks. It was late autumn when the court date was finally set. The leaves had browned and dropped like confetti across the yard, and the morning air carried a bite sharp enough to see your breath. By then, Cheryl's name had become shorthand in town for everything wrong with unchecked authority. Her mugshot had run in the local paper, and the HOA's reputation had gone from feared to radioactive. I had no intention of letting this whole thing fade into the background as a quiet scandal. Too many neighbors had been trampled. Too much had been swept under the rug for too long. So when Merritt called to say the district attorney wanted me to testify as a key witness, I didn't hesitate. "Bring everything," he said. "All your documentation, the drone footage, your correspondence, they're treating this like organized fraud." It wasn't just a civil case anymore. The charges against Cheryl now included conspiracy to commit wire fraud, falsifying financial disclosures, and unauthorized use of private property for personal gain. 3 other former board members had been indicted alongside her. One had already turned state's witness in exchange for a reduced sentence. The courtroom itself was smaller than you'd expect for something with this much weight. Rows of mismatched chairs, a judge with a voice like gravel, and a jury that looked half stunned, half furious before opening statements were even finished. I took the stand on the second day. The prosecutor, a young woman with a clipped tone and a steel gaze, wasted no time. "Mr. Everly, can you describe the first time the defendant attempted to contact you regarding alleged HOA fees?" I described it plainly. The clipboard, the claim, the refusal to provide actual documentation. From there, we walked through the rest: the fake maps, the surveillance, the coerced letters. She entered each document into evidence with careful precision. The internal meeting notes, the projected revenue spreadsheets, and the letter they tried to bribe me into silence with. Then she pulled out the budget report, the one with my so-called debt, already counted before the lien was ever filed. "Can you confirm this is the same document you discovered during your investigation?" I nodded. "It was in the envelope someone left anonymously." Cross-referenced with the county's public records, it showed they were planning to use fake fines from my property to secure a bridge loan. "And were you ever notified of this alleged debt through any formal court proceedings?" "Never." They tried to intimidate me into paying without any legal basis. When Cheryl's defense attorney finally stood, he tried pivoting. "Mr. Everly, wouldn't you agree that neighborhood associations often make honest mistakes in jurisdiction?" "No," I said. "Not when they falsify maps, lie to residents, and project income from properties they don't own." He tried to press me on whether I had a personal grudge. I answered without blinking. "I didn't know these people until they tried to illegally take money from me. My only grudge is against fraud." The courtroom stayed quiet as he sat down. Over the next few days, more witnesses testified. Lena recounted how her garden was destroyed without notice. Clyde presented receipts for fines he'd never agreed to pay. But the most damning moment came when the state's witness, former board treasurer Greg Talbot, took the stand. He was pale, uncomfortable, and clearly terrified of Cheryl, who sat with her arms folded, glaring at him like he'd betrayed some blood oath. "They knew the expansion plan had failed," Greg said. "But Cheryl said we could reinterpret boundaries if we were subtle about it. She said we'd fix the debt problem by collecting from properties that weren't paying, even if they weren't technically in the HOA." "And did you object?" the prosecutor asked. "I did, but she threatened to sue me for breach of board confidentiality. Said I'd be personally liable for any shortfall if I didn't go along." He went on to describe how they'd hired a software firm to create fake maps using outdated survey data, how they'd marked my Barnes parcel in their internal system as acquired, and how Cheryl had funneled over $12,000 into a private account registered under her husband's landscaping business money that came directly from coerced payments. By the end of his testimony, the jury looked like they were ready to vote then and there. Closing arguments followed quickly. The defense tried to argue that Cheryl had made administrative missteps under pressure. The prosecutor, in contrast, called it what it was: a deliberate, well-coordinated scheme to financially exploit landowners through intimidation and lies. It only took the jury 4 hours to return a verdict: guilty on all counts. Sentencing came a week later. Cheryl got 8 years. 2 board members received 5. Greg, the treasurer who testified, got probation and community service. The judge ordered full restitution to every resident who had been fined under false pretenses. A forensic accountant was appointed to comb through the HOA's records and identify all fraudulent transactions. As for me, I thought I'd feel triumphant. But the truth was, it felt more like relief. Like a weight had finally been lifted, one I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. In the months that followed, the county held a public forum to discuss oversight for homeowners associations. I sat in the back, listening as residents who'd never spoken up before shared their stories. There was talk of creating a regional task force to audit HOA financials, and a new ordinance requiring independent review of any lien attempt. I did my part quietly. Helped a young couple review their deed before buying a home nearby. Showed an elderly neighbor how to file a public records request. When a local journalist asked to interview me for a feature on property rights, I agreed on one condition: no hero stories, just facts. He kept his word. The article ran under the title, "The Barn That Stood Its Ground." As for the barn, it's a little more weathered now, but it's mine. I built a woodshed on the far end and added a chimney to the main room. Jasper has a heated pad under the porch and a view of the creek he never tires of. Sometimes I still find old mail from the HOA in my box, addressed to resident. I toss it in the wood stove. They don't own this land, never did, but now everyone knows it.